There were several headlines that intersected with the work that we do here at the Family Research Council. Among them being President Trump's White House meeting today with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the attack on a Mormon house of worship, and the indictment of a pastor in South Korea. So here to discuss all of this and a bit more, our panel for today, Travis Weber, FRC's Vice President for Policy and Government Affairs, and Casey Harper, Managing Editor for Broadcast at the Washington Stand. Travis, Casey, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on.
Okay, so let's start, Casey, with you. Ahead of the president's meeting today with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, there were some concerns expressed over what came out from the president's meeting last week with Arab and Muslim leaders. There was discussion about not allowing Israel to annex portions of Judea and Samaria, also known as the West Bank. That apparently did not come up in the meeting today, but there was discussion about a 21-point peace plan. Let's talk about that.
Sure. This peace plan is really a crescendo on a very dramatic 2 weeks for Netanyahu, Israel, Gaza, even Qatar and others in the region. Of course, last week at the UN, Netanyahu gave a kind of a fiery speech as people walked out in a dramatic fashion, and he even had that speech transmitted into Gaza, where people there could hear that his message was, hey, Hamas could end this war today if they lay down their arms and release the hostages. That came around the same time that we had news that President Trump actually met with Arab leaders and said that he would not not allow Israel to annex Judea and Samaria. And so that was the precedent coming up to Netanyahu's visit and his meeting with Trump today and press conference. And out of that, we see this 21-point peace plan. We can dig into it as much as we like, Tony, but a top-line takeaway is this looks closer to a two-state solution than things that we've seen in a while. And there are some big question marks on this peace plan.
Well, I think, Travis, I'm going to get your take on this. I mean, I think the 21-point plan, there's some things on the top that are problematic. But in fact, one of the references is to President Trump's 2020 peace plan that sets some goals in place for the Palestinian Authority, which most people think they'll never reach. But if they did, it would allow for a Palestinian state. However, the good news is that there was no discussion in this meeting about the Israelis not being allowed to exercise sovereignty over portions of Judea and Samaria, which was the focus of a letter that we spearheaded with over 250 pastors and Christian leaders signing to the president today. But Travis, I want to go to you and get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, no, Tony, I think certainly we still have to wait to see how things will be finalized in detail, rolled out, implemented. But if you just look at some of the basic points that are being discussed, I'll take one, point 6, about Hamas members committing to peace, living peacefully in Gaza, should the plan be implemented. And you think about that, one point, it just doesn't make sense at its core. This is an organization that inserts and imbues their educational curriculum, training up the youngest generation from when they're toddlers to hate, right, murder, dehumanize their opponents. How can you have that? And yet, as adults, after they've all been living in this culture that is reflective of this type of educational curriculum, how can you expect them to live and commit peacefully to the future? It just doesn't make any sense.
Well, yes, you're right. They had a shot at it, but now there is a commission, a trilateral commission or committee that will be put in place. It includes Israel, the U.S., and Qatar, which we'll have to watch very closely. As you said, there's a lot we don't know. Here's what we do know. We need to continue to pray as the facts come out, and of course we will keep people posted on this, because whatever plan is adopted, it needs to be in alignment with God's proposal and what He plans for the land. If not, whoever proposes something counter that has a problem. All right, let's move on. Casey, another unfortunate violent weekend. A number of shootings, one yesterday in Michigan at a Mormon meeting house. And I'm just going to say this as we set the stage for this, as you give us more details on that. But I just think we cannot see what's happening, the violence that's happening, apart from the spiritual climate, the spiritual warfare, the manifestation of evil that is happening in our country today. So give us the latest on this attack on a Mormon meeting house in Michigan.
Yeah, so police, law enforcement have released the name and identified the shooter who was actually killed in an exchange of gunfire with police there. He killed 4 people before himself being shot and also wounded 8 others. He allegedly also it was him that set the building on fire. The police said that he's actually had prior run-ins with law enforcement and operating while under the influence charge, as well as burglary. And the 40-year-old man was also a Marine veteran. So I agree with your point, though, Tony. We could talk about these violent instances so often now, and I think we've become desensitized to them, but it really hasn't always been this way.
Yeah. Well, there was another shooting on Saturday night in North Carolina was a Marine veteran, both, I believe, Afghanistan veterans. And again, it's troubling and problematic what we see, and it's another thing to be praying about. But Travis, I want to bring you in for just a moment on this, because FRC just recently released its Hostility Toward Churches annual report, which shows that while there has been a leveling off to a degree, there has been an increase in the number of shootings related to houses of worship. Now, we track Christian churches, but we see this trend across the board.
We do, Tony, and this is, we put out the report to get a sense of something that we felt was being reported anecdotally, but didn't have any trends attached to it, and that was violence against places of worship, specifically churches, because while we want to track anti-Semitic incidents and violence against Jews and others as well, we felt there was a gap. There was no report tracking the trend of violence against Christian places of worship, so we started just absorbing the publicly available data. This is just what's already reported in the news, and we found, starting in 2018, the few years after 2018 through 2022, we were tracking less than 100 incidents per year, but then as we jumped into 2023, we found 436 incidents, and the last year, 2024, that we released the data for this August, 415 incidents. So a very concerning uptick, Tony, I believe, is an indicator of where the culture is with regard to Christianity. Certainly, the motives are different for some of these attacks. And even as you were just referencing some of the violence we've seen, there's an element of mental illness. We have to address the effects of combat some of these veterans come home and are facing.
Well, and it's not, and we don't have time to get into this, but it's not the psychedelic drugs that some are proposing in Congress, which just opens people up to more mental illness, oppression by demonic forces. I mean, and look, again, we cannot look at these things apart from the spiritual nature. We need to pray into this. And next topic I want to go to, again, I think it's almost a harbinger spiritually for the United States, and it's coming out of South Korea. Pastor Son, South Korean pastor, arrested over the weekend, indicted. Travis, last week, at the Family Research Council, we hosted a delegation of South Korean Christian leaders who were saying, this is happening. This is a country that I remember Pastor Cho, largest church in the world at the time, this was in the 80s, he was telling a story about praying in his prayer closet and the president of the country calling him because the president would often look for counsel. We've been tracking this over the last year, and what pastors from South Korea have been saying, and this is the warning to the United States, they became complacent and stopped praying there because they had political power. And as a result, that power now is being used against them.
Tony, we really have to take a look at what's happening there. And I would just say for most folks, they probably think of South Korea as a beacon of democracy. And historically, in recent history, that would be true. Certainly, if you look at the region, foes like China and North Korea, South Korea has been a place of freedom. But we can't assume that's always going to be the case, and we have to observe what is happening. So, Tony, as you're alluding to, what we're observing is raids on churches. The largest church, Full Gospel Church, Pastor Cho's church, raided this past summer. Billy Kim, who was Billy Graham's interpreter when he was in Korea, his organization was raided, Pastor Son and others, and these are political opponents of the current communist-aligned regime who are being raided and targeted because of their conservative and their Christian principles. And so we have to at least ask the question, what is happening? There are some who are saying the CCP is behind the infiltration and meddling within South Korea's freedom and its democracy. And as you're saying, Tony, the church needs to exercise its spiritual authority and seek God's hand, blessing, and favor on Korea, and really cry out to God on behalf of their country, as we need to do in the United States. So this is a lesson for churches, the people of God, wherever they are. But we at FRC, as you were alluding to, with understanding what's happening, meeting with the Koreans who are connected to the situation, understand it, then advocate with government leaders here to step in, because there's a window. I think the decline that we're seeing can be stopped, but at some point, if things continue down a downward slide in South Korea, it's going to be very, very difficult, if not just very, very difficult. I mean, God can always reverse it, but we want to see the historic freedom preserved in the South, and we really want to see that spread to all of Korea and the region.
Right. I mean, it was a vibrant place. It was a place where the church was growing, democracy was taking root, but it was the prophetic voice of the church that was praying and appealing to heaven. And again, by their own admission, as I've spoken to many of these pastors from South Korea, the church became complacent and lost its prophetic zeal. And it's something that we need to take note of here in the United States. Casey, I want to go to you. We just have a few minutes left. AB 2060, or AB 260, this was a bill that was signed into law by California Governor Gavin Newsom. It is bolstering the state's existing shield laws designed to protect abortionists who are mailing abortion pills out of state. This is more of this that we see happening, these blue states mailing abortion pills into pro-life states, undermining the laws that the Dobbs decision had recognized they had the right to do. But it's happening because of the federal government's policy on mifepristone.
Yeah, that's right, Tony. I mean, someone who hasn't been paying attention to that issue, they might be shocked and say, it's incredible. How could that be that a pro-life state could still be having just as many abortions? And as you pointed out on the program before, abortions have actually risen since the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And so we're by no means in some post-abortion society since Roe v. Wade. And the way this is working at the state level is there are these states that pass pro-life laws, but then other, usually blue states like California, have doctors that are willing to prescribe mifepristone, which is the chemical abortion pill, to people in places like Texas. And so it's sort of a constitutional crisis, in my opinion. But now we're seeing that maybe, for instance, the husbands or other people who are related want to sue the state of California or the doctors rather, for facilitating this abortion that would be illegal in their state. So how does California react? Well, instead of respecting the sovereignty of Texas, they've passed laws where they're creating basically two sets of books. They're creating if a doctor prescribes an abortion pill, he can now do so anonymously, which is a pretty scary thing. And
right.
you have to ask the question, if it's not wrong, why do you have to hide it? But they have a set of books that only California law enforcement can see, and then there's another set of books where someone suing would be allowed to see, or federal law enforcement. I'm not sure that this would really fully hold up in court.
So that means that the prescription coming across state lines into a pro-life state, the prescription for mifepristone would not have the prescribing doctor's name on the prescription. Therefore, they would not be able to track down who issued that kill pill. And
or if
therefore
it's
they
a valid prescription, by the way.
Right. I mean, how do you know?
There's no doctor's name on it. I mean, anyone can get a prescription for that at that point.
Right.
If you don't need a doctor's name on
Right.
it, it's not even a prescription.
Travis, just have about 30 seconds left. I know I'm going to sound like a broken record, but you can't look at this without considering the spiritual implications here.
Tony, yeah, we know that God is light, and in him there's no darkness at all. So when people are trying to hide, like these states trying to shield their doctors, when the doctors want to hide, we have to ask why. And it's because there's a culture of death behind what's happening here, not a culture of life. And we need to promote and shed light on the culture of life everywhere we can.
And folks, I need you to weigh in on this and help get the word out. You can text the word unborn to 67742. That's unborn to 67742. Casey, Travis, thanks so much as always for joining me.
Thanks,
Thank
Tony.
you.